Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for a new PB&J card class. And in today's video, I will be sharing with you my process in creating 8 easy but elegant cards. And I'm just popping up here a real quick look of the supplies used in creating the cards. And I will put all of these supply lists for each individual card up back on screen at the very end of the video. So if you want to look at it in more detail then, you can just hit pause and you can look at each one on screen. So to begin, all of my cards feature our Stitch Stackers die. I will be working on that for each card. And for this first pair of cards, I am going to be highlighting the stamps from one of our new transparent sets. It's called Nature's Art, and this is actually from our new Nature's Art collection. And you can also see there the Radiant and Soar stamp sets that I'm using for the sentiments. So to begin, for all of the cards, I'm stamping them in my Misty Stamp Positioning tool, and I'm stamping onto Neenah Solar White cardstock. You could also stamp these with just a standard acrylic block, but I like to work in the Misty just in case I don't get the ink everywhere that it needs to be, and I can do multiple impressions with the Memento Tuxedo Black ink so that it's a nice dark rich color. So I did both of those. I'm just showing you here a quick peek at stamping those out. And then for all of my coloring, I am coloring using Copic markers. And what's fun about this set is you could really pick whatever your favorite medium is and follow the same design, but you do it with whatever medium you prefer. I did very basic coloring, and with such really beautiful images, you don't have to do a lot of shading or a lot of coloring, and it will still look finished. It'll still look detailed, and that's something I think is really great with all of the stamps that I've chosen today. You don't have to spend a lot of time coloring. If you want to, you can, if that's what you love. I love to spend a lot of time coloring, but if you don't, you can still get gorgeous cards with these images. So for my coloring technique with alcohol markers, I'm using Copic markers today and some Shinhan Art Touch Twin markers. And I'm just mixing and matching them, picking my favorite colors from my stash of markers. And I typically start by applying my darker color first and then blending it out using the lighter color. Sometimes I will put down that lighter color first and then blend it out, or put the darker in and then go back and blend it with the light. Once these flowers were done, I also am adding some white gel pen details. Here you can see that blending technique on this butterfly, and so sorry my head pops in a little bit in this video. I really do apologize for that. I like to be real close when I'm coloring, so I sometimes forget when I'm filming to not get quite as close as I usually do. But you can see here I put on the darker color first, my mid-tone color, and then went back and blended everything with the lighter color. And what I love about this set is you can go ahead and stamp everything that you want to color, stamp off a whole bunch of these and just have them ready to color throughout the week. Maybe you get a moment here or there that you can just go color for a little bit. And it's just a fun set. If you need to build up your stash of cards, you can do the sentiments for what you typically send, if it's encouragement or birthday or thinking of you. And it's a great way to just build up your stash of cards too if you're getting a little bit low. And sometimes when I'm making cards, I'm just in the mood to color. So for me, I was able to stamp a whole bunch of these and then just sort of relax and sit back and do all the coloring. They all have the same finishing design, so I didn't have to give too much thought to that. So I am going to show you the stamping and coloring of most of these, some clips of each of them, and then I will go back and show you how I finished off all of the cards. So the next stamp I'm featuring is our Brilliant stamp set, and I love every image that's on this stamp. I did a card for every single one of those images. So here's a look at the 4 cards that I did just featuring this one stamp set. There's something really charming but also elegant about the flowers and that little bird that are included in this set. So like I said, these 4 cards all use just that one transparent set. And like the other 2 cards that I just stamped and colored, I am stamping them onto the Neenah Solar White cardstock, which was die cut with our Stitch Stacker set, and just getting a couple of impressions so that I have a nice deep rich black color. And the Stitch Stackers die set adds a beautiful stitching detail around the outer edge. I'm using the largest one that's in the set, and it's just slightly smaller than a standard size card. So you can layer these onto I did colored note cards in the end just to finish them off and give them a nice border in the background. So here again, I'm just pulling out my alcohol markers, the Copic markers and the Shinhan Art Touch Twin markers, starting with my darker color and then adding in my mid-tone and then my lightest color. I tend to put the darker color sort of near the center of the flower and leaving the tips lighter. That's how I colored this one in, and that gives just enough variation to give it some extra dimension and depth and just to look different. But you don't have to give too much thought to coloring these. Even if you color them all just one solid color, I think they still look really beautiful. These flowers that I'm coloring today would also be great with colored pencils. Watercolor, if you just stamp them onto watercolor paper instead of the Neenah Solar White paper, then you could do the same design with watercolors. Just really whatever you prefer. Again, just following that same technique, my darker color towards the center of the flower. When I color it on, I do sort of a flicking or sweeping motion so that the end of my stroke with the marker, they don't all end at the same place. And this just makes it easier to blend and looks a little bit more natural when you're finished. I will list the exact colors used for each card at the very end of the video so that you can see exactly what was used. So there'll be a little picture of the card, and then all of the supplies, including the marker colors, will be listed. Here I'm just adding a little bit of extra shading to those feathers on the wing, to the tail feathers, and then I'll put a little bit of darker color right here. And then I'll go back and blend it with the lighter. So sometimes I do put down a lighter color first and then put my darker color on top, but typically I will do the darker color first. Now this one I wanted it to be just a little bit more blue than green, so I'm just going back over some of those lighter areas with more of a blue marker. This was B00. I'll move on to the flowers. Here again you can see towards the center of the flower, just flicking on my darkest color, and then I'll go back with the medium or mid-tone and then the lightest. Now you can get much more detailed with your shading on these flowers if you wanted, adding a lot of darker coloring where any of the petals are sort of behind another petal. So it's really up to you how detailed you want to get with the coloring. This vase with the flowers in it, I think is just such a happy looking vase and flowers, and I love using stamps that look like you're sending a bouquet of flowers, but the person that you're sending it to can keep these forever. It's just fun to send flowers this way. And this is sort of a reddish pink on the flowers. And then I wanted to keep the vase fairly simple so that it didn't distract from the colors of the flowers. So I'm just kind of giving it some shadows here using this is actually a gray-green color, and I'm just feathering it in from each side and blending it out with a very lighter color. Now we'll move on to this stamp set, Tranquility, and this is a miniature 3x4 inch set, but I love that it also has these really great sentiments too. So I liked the way it was laid out in the packaging with that sentiment going up vertically next to the vase of flowers, so I decided to just go ahead and stamp it that way too. We'll just stamp it one more time to darken things up. Again, with the vase and the water in here, you can get much more detailed with your coloring, but for what I was going for here for this set of cards, I just kept things really simple. Basically the same thing as I did on the bird on the other card. where I just did some turquoise colors and a little bit of blue. Now for these very small stems, I am using a Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft Pitt Artist pen. This is the small tip. It has an S on the marker. I believe it's considered a journaling pen with the Design Memory Craft line, and it's really nice for these really thin stems to keep in the lines. And I'll add just a touch of yellow up on these flowers, and then I wanted them to be white, but instead of leaving them a stark white, I'm going to add just some warm grays on here in some shadow areas, and this just gives it more of a finished look, especially because the background right up next to the flowers is going to be just inked with a very light antique linen distress ink, which I'll show you here as we move on further into the video. And this next card, this features our Radiant transparent set. This is our standard size transparent set, so you get some really nice large images and also some really nice smaller sentiments. I like having one-line sentiments, and these have a beautiful font. And this one, because the stamp is just a little bit larger, I didn't want it to stamp onto that stitching portion that I die cut. So I am using just some painter's tape here. And when you die cut this, it will create just a little bit of a line there that you can just easily line up your tape. Now, this was the only tape I had on hand, so it's a little bit wider than you would need it to be. So you could just use a smaller piece of removable tape. I like painter's tape, but I usually don't have this wide of a piece. But anyways, it worked. And I did that before I stamped, so that these stamped edges of this beautiful large sort of spray of flowers would not extend beyond onto that die cut border. And this way I can also keep my card as a one-layer card. Now on these flowers, I added some darker color nearest to the center of the flower, and I also added it sort of underneath where those petals sort of fold over, and that gives a lot of really nice dimension to that flower. On the yellow flowers, I kept things fairly simple, darker towards the center of the flower. These ones in that sort of the upper portion where the other petal would overlap, I put that darker color, and then blending with my light, my mid-tone and my lightest colors. And the leaves on this stamp are also really fun to color. They offer a lot of different ways that you could color them. On these, for example, I'm coloring them just with darker shading towards sort of the bottom of the leaf. But because they have that line down the center, it would be fun. You could just do light on one side, dark on the other. Then you also have another style of leaf within this bouquet. So you can do, for this other style, I'm doing a different color for those. So you just get even more variation to the whole design. Now, to complete these cards, I started with this one because I already had that masking tape on, but for all of them, I mask off that outer border. So you create the look that you've matted this, but it stays nice one layer, and it just looks so crisp and clean when you're done. And I'm applying Distress ink using an ink blending tool and a foam pad, and I'm starting with the color of Antique Linen. I sort of start off of the edge and work my way on, and I am making sure that I apply some ink along all parts of that edge so that that will be defined when I lift up the tape. And then I'm adding just a touch of Gathered Twigs Distress ink, again using an ink blending tool and a foam pad, mostly towards the corners and not extending as far towards the center of the card. And you can see here when you pull up that masking tape, it just is such a beautiful effect. And I think in person it's even prettier because it's so crisp, that line there. So here's a look at that finished card. I just mounted it onto a colored note card just for some added interest in the background. And this other card is another one where I just followed that same technique. I taped off the edges. I added my distress inks and then pulled up the tape for that. Now for the next cards, to finish those off, I did add some background stamping. So I've chosen here some of my favorite stamps to do sort of some tone-on-tone stamping in the background. I love using Life's Journals and the Flourish borders and also the Branch of Love. The Script Cling stamp as well as the Parade of Squares, they all just make really nice backgrounds when doing this type of effect. It kind of almost gives a vintage look to the backgrounds too. And this is sort of a design that I go back to frequently, not always in this exact same, you know, with the die cutting and the flowers colored with Copics, but it is something I really do like to do, this antique linen distress inking and then stamping sort of tone on tone in the background. So again, here I'm just applying my inks. I started with the antique linen, and then I'm moving in with the gathered twigs, just very lightly, mostly in the corners. And also by stamping onto the background, it will cover any imperfections that you may have in your inking. So if you get a little heavy-handed or it's a little uneven, this is a great way to hide that too. So here I am stamping these using my stamp positioning tool, and the reason is I like to build up the layers of the antique linen stamping in the back. So oftentimes the first couple impressions you won't see very much because you've already inked the background with that same color, but by using a stamp positioning tool you can very slowly build up that so it's till you're happy with it. So instead of going too dark or with too dark of an ink, you can start with a lighter ink and then just do multiple impressions so that you're just really happy with it, and you can stop right when you get to that point that you like. So I prefer to go light and add a couple extra impressions than have the chance of going too dark. I also do not apply the ink all over the stamp. You can see I'm applying it to just portions of the stamp so that I don't do too much stamping right onto that flower. And then I just peel up that tape and it's ready to be mounted to the card. So it's just a really fast, easy way to create a set of elegant cards. I'll show you just a little bit more of that background stamping, and so you can get a look at some of those stamps in action as well. This one is called Elaborate. This is another really great stamp for doing this tone-on-tone background. You can see I'm applying the ink just sort of around the edges. Trying not to stamp right on top of the flowers or the vase, but it really, if you do, it's not a big deal. It is very forgiving, especially because you're doing it in such a light color. Now, if you wanted to have more color on your background, you could certainly do your background inking with a different color besides antique linen, and then just use that same color to do your background stamping. And we'll just peel that up and give you another closer look at that finished card. And for this next one, this is the Parade of Squares stamp. And again, all of these stamps that I'm using, including these background stamps, will be shown at the very end of the video up on screen. Individually for each card. So if you see one that you really like in particular, you can find that stamp or that marker combination right away. So just another look there at that finished card. Now this one is one of my absolute favorites. I think it's the most forgiving of all of them. This is the Life's Journal set, and it just makes it look like it's kind of on this old piece of paper. So I'm just putting that ink mostly off to one side, moving it down a bit, and I'll just add a little more stamping at the bottom. And I'm just trying to do the same number of impressions so it matches up with the top. Get one more there. And there's that finished cherry blossom card. Now for this one, I'm using the two stamps that come in our Branch of Love miniature transparent set. I've used these a lot for this sort of tone-on-tone look. They're so handy, and I like having sort of a floral or greenery type stamp since the main image on this is a butterfly. And these just have such a nice curve and elegant line to them. And because there's two, it makes it easy, like you can see here, where you can just stamp both at the same time. And then finally, the last background stamping I'm going to do uses our Flourish border set, and this set is full of all different sizes and styles of these sort of vintage Flourish borders, and they're perfect if you don't want to do that all over stamping. Just grab one of these and you can put it along the bottom or the sides or the top or create an entire border with it. Here I'm just using one of the smaller designs along the bottom here to sort of fill in this open space beneath the flower and the sentiment. I thank you so much for watching today. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, on our website and blog, and I will link to all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And here's the list of all the supplies. As you can see, for each card, it'll scroll through here right up on screen. Happy stamping!